Three colossal pyramids. Three legendary kings. In one story, we've all been told that the pyramids of Giza were built as their tombs. But there's a problem. No royal remains were ever found inside. Not Khufu, not Khafre, not Menkaure. The sarcophagi were empty, the burial chambers bare. For centuries, this was explained away. Tomb robbers perhaps stole everything. But what if the tombs were never inside the pyramids to begin with? What if they were never robbed because they've never been found? What if the real tombs still lie intact, hidden in plain sight beneath the sands of Giza? The Greek historian Herodotus wrote that Cheops was buried in underground chambers, cut into the very hill the pyramids stand on. That detail was brushed aside, but maybe it was the key all along. What if the true royal tombs are still down there, sealed and untouched since the Old Kingdom? And what if they're only one part of something far bigger, vast underground world, waiting to be rediscovered? In ancient Egyptian cosmology, the underworld wasn't just a place of death. It was a sanctuary and a workshop of the gods. Sokar, deity fused with Osiris and Ptah, was its master craftsman. Egyptian texts speak of him fashioning silver tools and assisting in various tasks such as digging ditches and canals. His domain wasn't only in the sky, it was also beneath the ground. It makes sense to imagine sanctuaries built in his honor, hidden deep underground. Perhaps even the lost halls of records from a forgotten age. We already know of complex underground systems at Giza, like the Osiris Shaft, a multi-level vertical complex cut deep into the bedrock. Proof that the ancient builders went far below the surface when they wanted to. One of the oldest Egyptian stories offers a startling clue. In the Westcar Papyrus, the pharaoh Cheops, known also as Khufu, summons a magician named Jedi. He asks about the secret chambers of Thoth, the inventor and scholar among gods. Jedi doesn't know their exact number, but he knows where the information can be found, in a flint box inside a chamber called Revision in Heliopolis. Egyptologist Alan Gardner interpreted this passage as follows. I conclude, therefore, that the word used in the Westcar Papyrus means secret chambers, means that Cheops was seeking for details concerning the secret chambers of the primeval sanctuary of Thoth, in order that he might copy the same when building his pyramid. And that, surely, the room in question must have been an archive, not a storehouse of any kind. This search for ancient archives hints at something intriguing. A knowledge gap between ancient Egyptians and mysterious others whose monuments Khufu admired. He believed they left hidden chambers containing special knowledge. What convinced Khufu? Had his predecessors discovered something? Did Khufu himself make discoveries? Despite tradition, there's good reason to believe that the Great Pyramid was not built by Khufu at all. Archaeologists call this usurping a monument, renaming or repurposing what already stood. If Khufu merely refurbished the Great Pyramid, the decisive proof would be to discover his genuine burial chamber elsewhere, and only that find could turn this theory into fact. Whether Khufu found the secret archives of Thoth or not is unknown, as many other aspects of his reign are poorly documented, and the story in the Westcar Papyrus breaks off. But Khufu might eventually find something elsewhere, and there is strong evidence that this place is not above the ground. Some sources suggest that secret chambers linked to the ancient gods were hidden in Rostau, a mysterious underworld region described in the pyramid texts, coffin texts, and other netherworld literature, preserved for centuries by Egyptian priests. And where was Rostau? It was the ancient name for the area around the Sphinx, often translated as the mouth of the passages, a literal gateway to the subterranean realm. Greco-Roman writers described tunnels cut before a great flood to protect sacred wisdom. Medieval Arab chronicles echoed the tale, crediting King Sarid, often equated with Cheops, with vaults under the plateau. Other stories tell of the cave tomb of Hermes Trismegistus and his father Agathodaimon beneath the plateau. For 2 millennia, scholars called it myth. Then someone looked at the floor of the Sphinx Temple.
This is a plan of the Sphinx Temple, and the legs and paws of the Sphinx may be seen at the left. At the top of this picture is the corner of a much more recent temple of the New Kingdom. It was actually built there when the Sphinx Temple itself was completely covered in sand and they didn't even know it existed. Here we are inside the Sphinx Temple. This temple is not open to the public, and very few archaeologists have ever been inside. It's kept locked. Well, we were in the temple doing our work, and my wife Olivia, who works with me, said, "What is that over there in the floor? That's a strange thing." "What is that strange thing in the floor?" Well, that's where this story all began.
Inside the temple, a long, narrow granite channel runs beneath the floor. A massive granite slab was brought from Aswan and lowered into the special place in the bedrock.
Here's the strange feature, the long, thin, rectangular feature that's so mysterious. This is a huge piece of granite brought all the way from Aswan, hundreds of miles to the south, up along the Nile. And it's been brought all the way from there in order to be set down into this hollow carved out of the bedrock of the floor of the Sphinx Temple. In fact, it goes out, as we'll later see, on the other side of the wall and continues. Altogether, it's 30 feet long.
Archaeologists that excavated this temple described this strange feature as a wastewater conduit or water drain.
Well, I decided to test that hypothesis. We had a device called an inclinometer with us, and I was able to determine from that this feature slants inwards, not outwards. Therefore, it could not have drained anything from the temple. However, if you examine it very carefully, you see the tiny, tiny hole in the front. Couldn't have carried much liquid anyway, even if you had wanted to drain something into the temple, which of course you wouldn't have wanted to do.
So, what was it? All of these granite blocks not only reduced the drain's overall volume, but were also fitted so tightly over the narrow groove that they seemed meant to hold something firmly in place within it. It was perfectly cut for movement. Perhaps not of water, but of something solid. Something that moves back and forth. And what is solid and moves back and forth within a long, thin groove?
If you examine the edges to the left and to the right, at the bottom of the photo, you can see distinct patterns of wear, and these are much clearer when you're actually examining the object on the spot. I believe that this was a cable groove, and this enormously complex construction was made in order to safely have a triple cable, and that the cables were used to lower into a crypt an enormously heavy weight, which would have to be a stone sarcophagus of maybe 60 tons, 100 tons. And because of the danger of flying cables and people being killed and so forth, they went to all this trouble to construct this meticulously careful cable lowering conduit.
Lowering a multi-ton stone sarcophagus into a chamber is no simple task. Not today, and not in ancient Egypt either. It'll require not only the strong granite conduit to withhold multi-ton weight pressure, but also extremely strong ropes. Robert Temple argues that these were cotton ropes, While cotton was used to make strong ropes by the 19th century, and Egyptian cotton became world-renowned, it is not native to Egypt, and there is no archaeological evidence of cotton rope use in pharaonic times. Yet as early as 4000 BC, Egyptian craftsmen were producing industrial-strength ropes from papyrus, flax, and palm fiber, some as thick as 160 millimeters. There are a few studies reported that they twisted them into braided cables strong enough to suspend heavy cargo or lift ship sails. Studies show Egyptians made heavy zero-twist ropes, opposite plied so they don't spin under load, critical for smooth lowering. Surviving examples use various grass types and flax. The largest hawsers were built from thick, twisted papyrus culms. But there's a catch. The granite conduit in the Sphinx Temple is narrow, barely wide enough to fit 3 massive papyrus culm ropes. Why carve such a narrow groove if the main hauling ropes were massive? Most likely, the slot held not the weight-bearing lines, but a thinner, secondary cable, a guide that kept the heavy stone box steady and centered as the larger ropes, anchored elsewhere, lowered it into the chamber. The granite groove kept the guiding cable steady, preventing side-to-side movement. Granite plugs blocked any cable recoil, while the main load-bearing ropes, possibly running through a separate shaft, carried the weight. But there's a second possibility. The conduit might predate the known temple works and belong to an earlier builder's team with a different cable technology, one that used lighter composite cords, unfamiliar braids, perhaps a system we've yet to recognize. In other words, the engineering we see could be Egyptian, or it could be the footprint of someone who worked this ground before them. We may therefore have here in this so-called drain a rare surviving example of a lowering mechanism, such as we know that the ancients must have used in countless instances, but of which they have left no other trace.
Here's an ancient Egyptian depiction of a team of men using ropes and cables, which they used a great deal both to measure fields on the surface and to raise and lower heavy weights. Here is a triple-grooved pulley made of basalt, which was excavated at the Giza plateau by Salim Hassan, who found 2 of them. These are the kind of pulleys that were used for the very ropes which I've just been discussing for raising and lowering the heavy sarcophagi. This is the same basalt pulley seen from another angle. Here are 3 different views of a stone counterweight for raising and lowering, which was excavated at Giza from the Old Kingdom date.
Salim Hassan observed that the paired basalt pieces, discovered beside enormous stone blocks and scored with rope grooves, were probably components of a hoisting device built for raising huge weights. A combination of such wheels in a block, or system of blocks in a tackle, by means of which the power is increased. In other words, they belong to a block and tackle system that multiplies force and lets workers move heavy loads with far less effort. These pulley housings, snatch blocks, were almost certainly not carved entirely from stone. The basalt formed only the high wear contact faces where the ropes ran, providing durability. Paired triple groove blocks gave each rope 6 contact points, 3 full turns, dramatically increasing grip and control, exactly as modern engineering predicts. The remainder of each housing was probably wood, long since decayed. Such rigging can handle a typical 7-ton granite box. 100 tons is doubtful on its own, but it could function as part of a larger system. The concept likely echoes seafaring, wooden blocks and rope pulleys, standard to mariners, not to pharaonic Egypt. More puzzling, there's no documented culture using basalt pulley blocks. If this were standard pharaonic tech, we'd expect more than 2 stone pulleys. Their design reads like a sailor's solution, controlled rope handling rather than simple cranes and ramps. That, in turn, hints at a gap between the megalithic builders and later dynasties, the same kings who spoke of earlier gods ruling this land. The Sphinx Temple granite channel doesn't end at the temple wall. It continues straight under it and into the rock face beyond. An interesting feature has been discovered at its end.
This is where the channel enters the cliff, and I cleared the sand away with my hands, pushing the rubbish up to the end. The long granite slab ends at the point, about 2/3 of the way up this photo, where the pale color ends. The darker color beyond that is the desert sand that's blown in on the wind. And there's no stone there because I had a spike in my belt as we used those for stone samples. And I was able to plunge it down as far as I could get it. There's no stone there, and this is clearly a vertical shaft filled with sand. And this is where the cable came out of that cable groove, the triple cable, and this is where they would have lowered the very heavy objects into the crypt or tomb beneath.
Where does that hidden shaft go? Even the temple's first excavator felt something was off. Herbert Ricky wrote, "It is difficult to understand location of its beginning in the courtyard and its inclined direction, which gave it a slope on the old lower terrace to the east. It may seem odd that water to be removed would be let into shafts cut in the natural rock, which ought to have filled up quickly." He noted that entire walls had been laid over these so-called drains, clear proof the channels were already there when the Sphinx Temple rose above them. In other words, the visible monument rests on a deeper, older structure, one the builders deliberately wove into their new design and then buried from sight.
There is a second cable conduit in the Sphinx Temple floor, and this is on the south side of the temple. Much more difficult to see. I took this photo. It then runs under a wall. This is not one that appears to have a granite slab, but it seems to be based on limestone blocks, therefore would not have borne such a heavy weight. It has not been properly excavated. As you can see, it's full of rubble that nobody's ever bothered to clear out, and it certainly needs investigating. I took this close-up photo of the hole into which the southern cable conduit of the Sphinx Temple disappears.
Information on this conduit is scant, and its location as a water drain appears illogical. The channel runs beneath the core masonry for an unknown distance, turns left to a shaft of uncertain depth, then carries on south, perhaps toward the question mark on the plan, though the end is unclear. The northern part of the channel from the shaft had been taken out of service, and according to archaeologist Herbert Ricky, was filled with rubble stones, whilst the southern section from the shaft was left open. Unfortunately, no cross-section drawings are given of the above channel. Ricky thought that both conduits predated the current temple, and that they may have belonged to something else that had disappeared without a trace. This was likely another cable lowering device, but unlike the granite-lined one, it seems more functional than ceremonial. Probably not meant for lowering anything too heavy, so it may have been used to lower tomb treasure, which was much lighter, or to move workers up and down more easily. But there is, in fact, another striking evidence, hidden in plain sight within this temple, pointing to a vast subterranean chamber system beneath the structure. Remarkably, this evidence has gone unnoticed by previous investigators.
But that's only the beginning, because I believe that there's a big crypt underneath which may even dwarf the temple itself. This is myself standing in the courtyard of the Sphinx Temple, and among the blocks behind me are huge boulders of what have turned out to be stalactites from a cave. I checked that by taking a fragment to the Natural History Museum, and it was unambiguously described as a stalactite. What are large stalactite fragments doing on the floor of the Sphinx Temple if they didn't come from down below? Natural caverns in the limestone bedrock enlarged into chambers and crypts.
A stalactite? Stalactites typically form in limestone caves underground, where mineral-rich water drips in air-filled spaces. If one this size had been removed from below, it would require tools, lighting, and yes, lifting equipment. In other words, the very kind of cable-lowering mechanisms Temple documented. But there's a bigger implication. Where there is one stalactite, there are others. Where there are others, there are caves. And if those caves were quarried, enlarged, or repurposed, then we're not just talking about tombs anymore. We're talking about an entire subterranean complex. If so, what lies underneath may rival what was built above. A complex large enough to shelter treasure, libraries, or sacred relics, hidden as Egypt fell into chaos at the end of the 6th dynasty. And it might still be there, untouched.
Here's a photo of what the eastern wall of the Valley Temple looked like in about 1910. This was published in 1912. And as you can see, off to the right is a mountain of sand which covered the still unknown Sphinx Temple at that time. I was necessitated to translate the only existing excavation report of the structure from German into English. And imagine my thrill when I saw in the excavation report these drawings showing yet another cable channel, which is here called a waterspout of granite. One doesn't normally use granite to make waterspouts, and of course this is no more a waterspout than any of the others. You see the groove at the left in the long granite slab, resembling the others that we've seen, and then look at the top right picture. That little semicircular hole at the bottom, beneath the stones on top, with the groove laid down in the granite, is yet another cable channel. And the picture below it is showing that channel, looking down upon it. And we clearly have more things going on in the Valley Temple like we have in the other temples.
Both of these channels open directly onto the temple's ceiling. It's a curious design, one that suggests the heavy lifting happened outside, not within. Perhaps it was made to keep the interior undisturbed or to allow many hands to work at once, unseen from above.
Here we have a portion of one of the excavation diagrams, and at the right we have something called a Wasserspeier, which is a waterspout, but there was no waterspout. That was yet another cable groove for lowering heavy weights to crypts beneath this temple. Here we have yet another excavation diagram, very beautifully drawn, of the west end of the Valley Temple, and at left we have two things which are called Entwässerung, which means water drains, and they were cable channels. Here's a larger version of that diagram, showing it more in context.
Positioning the cable operators on the temple roof gave them height and control, crucial for lowering heavy objects from above and keeping them stable as they descended. But that required a material that could withstand immense pressure. Today we'd use steel. Back then, they used granite. One of these so-called spouts runs east to west, emerging from the temple's west wall, its end now broken. It's narrow, finely carved, and clearly not meant for water. If one of these grooves was for cables, then so were the others. They share the same design, the same craftsmanship, and the same extraordinary cost. Robert Temple also found vertical shafts hidden within the temple walls, absent from all official plans. They may have offered access to what lies beneath, and Astonishingly, no one has properly studied the Valley Temple since 1912. If Khufu and Khafre didn't build the pyramids as their tombs, but merely inherited them, then the real question is, where are their tombs? In fact, the Greek historian Herodotus stated clearly that the tomb of Khufu was not inside a pyramid at all, but beneath the plateau itself. Herodotus wrote that, on this road, meaning causeway, then 10 years were expended in informing the subterraneous apartments on the hill, on which the pyramids stand, which he had made as a burial vault for himself. The hill on which the pyramids stand is the Giza Plateau. Herodotus places the tomb in underground chambers cut into that hill, not inside the Great Pyramid. This claim has been largely ignored, mostly because it challenges what most have long assumed. Even more telling, Herodotus links these chambers with the Khufu Causeway, a long-lost structure that once climbed from the floodplain up to the funerary temple of Khufu, now vanished, except for one part of it that is still there, near the Great Pyramid's eastern base.
This is the magnificent surviving portion of the basalt floor of what was once the funerary temple of Cheops, which stood on the east side of the Great Pyramid. All of the traces of that temple have vanished, and beneath this floor there is yet another tomb. This is a reconstruction plan by an archaeologist of that missing temple, and you can see the black portion here is the surviving bit of the basalt floor. Well, leading off to the right from it is another one of these cable conduits which bends and leads to a place where people would have guided the conduit. The interesting part of this story is that the tomb of Cheops probably lies beneath this funerary temple of Cheops floor, the very bit of the floor that's still intact. And I do believe that Cheops' tomb is intact in that spot directly underneath there, and that cable conduit was used to lower his sarcophagus.
Burying a tomb beneath a funerary temple makes perfect sense. What better protection than placing a monument on top of the entrance? Robbers would have to destroy the entire temple just to reach it. The Great Pyramid looms just behind the temple is a perfect distraction. Who would suspect the real tomb lies beneath the temple floor, not inside the pyramid itself? The funeral likely took place within the temple walls, shielding the ceremony from view. The coffin, brought in under cover of ritual, would then be quietly lowered into a sarcophagus already waiting below as its chamber prepared long before the king's death.
I made a search of excavation reports of Giza to see if any more of these strange conduits existed for cable guides for raising and lowering things, and I found this photo. You can see that this one is just like the one in the Sphinx Temple. It's got a groove for a cable with a tightly fitting block above it to hold it down, and this was underneath the funerary temple of Khafre, which is at the foot of the pyramid of Khafre. Here's a photo taken at the time of the excavation showing the channel for the cable at the funerary temple of Khafre, of which we just saw the opening in close-up. The cable conduit at the funerary temple of Khafre goes out underneath the south wall, and it's at the left in the middle of this plan.
These photos, published in 1912, were taken by Uwe Holscher, the excavator of the funerary temple of Khafre, the remains of which sit at the eastern foot of the pyramid of Khafre and at which the Grand Khafre Causeway culminates. Here's what Holscher had to say about it in his article. Also very interesting is the discovery of an admittedly rather simple drainage system in the courtyard. It lies open for an extent of roughly 3 meters, and then it disappears under a covering stone of granite, which itself is then again covered by a thin limestone slab. Then it continues under the pavement and reappears again south of the southern exterior walls at a great depth. Undoubtedly, it served for the purpose of leading the rainwater out of the alabaster pavement of the courtyard. We're told this was a drain, yet it's sealed under 3 layers of stone and runs beneath massive temple walls. But what water could even reach it? And then it reappears much deeper, exactly what we'd expect if it leads to a subterranean chamber.
Here we see a close-up of the plan showing the Hofentwässerung, the non-water drain. You can see more clearly here how extensive it is, and that it runs from the far side of the south wall right into the main court. And I believe that the crypt or tomb is directly beneath the floor of the courtyard of this temple, and that what was going on is that temples were being built on top of tombs as the foolproof way to preserve them from tomb robbers.
This likely marks Khafre's tomb site. But for centuries, no one took these so-called drains seriously, missing the clues to hidden royal tombs beneath. They were sealed under plaster, stone floors, and later buried in sand. Khafre's temple wasn't even uncovered until Holscher excavated it in 1909. A few early accounts mention scattered ruins, but no one looked deeper. By then, the drains were already hidden beneath rubble and time. This is the funerary temple of Menkaure. It clings to the pyramid's base, almost as if it were squeezed in after the fact. Excavation records show no sign of a cable conduit here, so the search moved farther down to the opposite end of the causeway. There lies the Valley Temple of Menkaure, now buried in sand, but once uncovered during excavations over a century ago.
Here is an excavation photo of the Valley Temple of Mycerinus, and you can see that there's a corridor running up along the center with various ruined walls. And if you look to the left of the picture, in the foreground, you see another one of these cable channels. And this time, there's a kind of a box shape at the end of it. That is a limestone block which has been hollowed out and laid down into the soil, because this temple is not on the bedrock, it's on sandy gravel. And they couldn't cut a hole in the bedrock like they did in the Sphinx Temple, so they had to cut one out of a limestone block and sink that limestone block into the soft floor, because either men had to stand there or a machine had to be there to guide the cable.
So here is another mysterious conduit, angled like the one beneath the Sphinx Temple and likewise dismissed as a water drain. In this second monument, George Reisner checked the cut itself and recorded that it deliberately slopes inward, not outward. Bingo! 2 separate sites, both cut with the same inward tilt, and in each case, the trench disappears beneath a wall and the temple's paved floor, showing it was set in place long before the rest of the building rose above it. Why line a narrow trench with stone, seal it under a royal temple, and tilt it inward? Most likely because it wasn't for drainage at all, but for lowering something massive, perhaps from a stone, into a hidden chamber below. Everything points to this being the lost tomb of Menkaure.
So what we see is that these 3 pharaohs, Cheops, Khafre, and Mycerinus, 2 of them at their funerary temples and 1 of them at his valley temple, had these mysterious lowering devices running under walls with the temples built on top of them, And I'm convinced that Mycerinus' tomb is intact here beneath his valley temple.
And now, science begins to catch up. In 2016, a team of geophysicists conducted an electrical resistivity survey beneath the Giza plateau, focusing on the area around the Sphinx and the Pyramid of Khafre. Their scans reached depths of up to 150 meters into the bedrock. They weren't looking for tombs, but they found something remarkable. The survey revealed 3 dense blocks, probably solid limestone, cut through by vertical zones of low resistance. In plain terms, solid stone interrupted by narrow vertical anomalies, likely shafts or man-made cuts. Even more compelling, these line up exactly with the locations Robert Temple marked as possible cable conduits, suggesting something was lowered through engineered channels deep into the bedrock. Even more striking, in the western part of the Giza plateau, the resistivity drops 100-fold between depths of 45 and 70 meters. A sharp boundary between solid rock and open voids, possibly caverns, chambers, or filled shafts. That's precisely the depth range you'd expect if there were large hollowed spaces below the temples, spaces left behind from quarried alabaster, now used as tombs or vaults. If there's a smoking gun in peer-reviewed geophysical literature, this is it. Another clue sits in a mainstream Egyptology report on drill cores. Near the Sphinx Temple, Zahi Hawass sank a 16-meter test bore. The bit refused to go farther. The pounder hauled up a 10-centimeter shard of red granite, followed by smaller chips of the same stone. Hawass described it as rubble, fallen granite blocks that once lined the Sphinx and Khafre's temple, later knocked over or taken. Yet granite this deep could also mark something less accidental, a buried chamber walled and sealed long ago. A promising upgrade for archeology, space-borne radar. A breakthrough in synthetic aperture radar, upgraded to Doppler tomography, lets satellites treat the ground like a drum. Tiny vibrations from wind, footsteps, or distant earthquakes shift the radar's return signal, allowing the satellite to act like a giant microphone, able to hear into the rock and detect what's buried below. In this study, an earlier version of SAR Doppler tomography successfully mapped nearly every known chamber in the Great Pyramid. It even detected the mysterious Big Void, confirmed by muon scans, and most impressively, it predicted the small north face corridor that an endoscope would later confirm in 2023. Building on those verified hits, the team's next-gen software claimed to have uncovered something wholly unexpected. 8 helical shafts, spiraling roughly 600 meters below the plateau and converging into cube-shaped chambers. Something is clearly buried beneath, but what exactly are these structures? And what else might lie hidden beneath other pyramids? As scanning technology advances, even more remarkable discoveries may soon come to light. There are still questions about how these findings are being interpreted. The technology itself is no sci-fi gimmick. Harmonics are already X-rays, dams, bridge cables, and active subway tunnels. The physics is sound. The real challenges are resolution and clean vibration signals, wide rigid structures, bridge decks, even the pyramid's huge limestone faces, bounce back crisp echoes. Slender shafts buried in a noisy desert do not. Doppler SAR can spotlight big, echo-rich voids, but it's not a magic X-ray. Experts peg its success at 50–80% for finding large cavities, far lower for fine detail. To date, the Italian results remain a press release teaser, no peer-reviewed paper, and no release data. Until those appear, their spiral shaft vision is compelling but unverified. The pyramids seem like only the tip of the stone iceberg. The vast mass of mystery lies hidden beneath. Break through one concealed shaft, and the buried bulk, true royal tombs, Sokar sanctuaries, perhaps even the fabled Hall of Records, could rise into the light.
I don't know who might be buried beneath the Sphinx Temple, or who might be in the crypts beneath Valley Temple. Maybe they're not even tombs. Certainly, one would expect to find King Snefru buried somewhere around there. But it could be anybody. However, I believe that these are intact. The Sphinx Temple was covered in sand for 4,000 years and cannot possibly have had anything beneath it robbed. It's still sealed. It's still intact. We have to open these tombs. We have to find out what's beneath Giza.